In this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at mesh smoothing and how it works. So if I go ahead and look at these three primitive shapes, I can fairly easily see with the lighting that's currently in this scene that these edges right here are hard. And again, I might have to move the camera around because if the light's facing just right, I might not see these edges. But as soon as I move it around, I can kind of see what's going on. But all the edges on this cube are hard. If I look at this, let's turn the wireframe on so I can see this. All these edges up here and down here are all hard. Go ahead and turn that wireframe off. But all these ones are going to be soft. I really don't even see that those are there when I turn wireframe off. And let's look at the sphere. This one, everything is going to be soft. It just looks soft all over the place. And if I select those edges, you can kind of see they're everywhere, but none of them are hard. In the past, the way that we've kind of went into doing this, let's go ahead and grab all these, give them a new material called default, hit OK, jump to the shading tree, make sure we have that material selected, and then all the way down here, we have this little guy right here that defaults to 40. That's your default smoothing angle. So if I was to change this, let's pop it up to 180, and again, the little degrees here, so that's an angle. So again, 180 degrees straight, 90 degrees like that, 45 like that. So I'm just looking back to old math classes. You probably already know all this stuff. But regardless, at this point, my smoothing is 180. So that's as high as it can get. So effectively, everything looks smooth. So again, the transition from this face to this face is going to be smooth. There's no hard edge right here. When it sets to default, again, just because of how this mesh is made, this angle right here is smooth. So again, we're at 40 degrees. If I grab this edge and I move it up until this gets kind of greater than 90 or less than 40, not greater than 90. It's already at a 90 degree angle. So if I start moving this up, I'm gonna make sure I have a good angle for this. Eventually right there, you're gonna see that pop when it goes hard, smooth, and that's because of this angle right here. If I take this angle and I take it down to 0, smoothing angle 0, hit enter, now this is going to look like kind of N64, Sega Saturn, those really old game consoles back in the day when they first made 3D, because they didn't have the smoothing from one polygon to another, so polygon faces looked something like this. So in the past, we've just, in most cases, changed this smoothing angle to get different results. But realistically, I might want all three of these shapes to have the same materials, and I actually want the cube potentially to look something like this, but the cylinder to look something like this. And if they're the same material, I can't set this to 40 degrees and 180 degrees. If I hit enter, it doesn't know what to do, so it just goes back to its default. So what I need to do is find a different way of smoothing. So let's go ahead and look at that. So what we're going to do is, 1, we have our geometry. It's right here. 2, our geometry has a material applied. And now what we're going to do is we're going to change a material setting that lets us specifically target edges we want to be hard. So the setting here is we have the material selected, Properties tab, this little material reference tab. Then we're going to hit this little More button, or we're going to take this, if we have a high resolution computer, or take this, slide it up, either way. There's this little section right here. So there's crease by smoothing angle, that's what we had it on. And then there's crease by hard edges. We want this one, but we don't want this one. And by default, both are checked. But since this one is on top, it kind of overrides this one down here. So let's turn this one off, crease by smoothing angle, and you'll see everything just went soft. And have crease by hard edges, we'll leave this one turned on. So now what we're going to do is jump over to the Game Tools tab. So to get to this, there's this little tab right here. It's got a joystick. If I hover over it, it says Game, switch to the Game toolbar. Let's click on that. Now all of our tools change. Let's make this a little bit more narrow. So what we want to focus on is, by default, you're probably going to be on this Export Presets tab right here. We want to go down to this Vertex Map tab, click on that, and this is going to be our little bread and butter tab right here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons that are important. This angle, we're not really going to pay attention to this at this point. And these guys, these are very useful, both of them, but we're not going to worry about them for right now. So in this menu, there's a harden, there's a soften, there's select hard, and there's select soft. So how this works is you go to edge mode, you select the edges that you want to be hard, you hit harden, and lo and behold, those become hard edges. If I zoom around to the back of this, I didn't select these edges, they're not hard. These ones are hard. Again, you see that nice crisp line, whereas this one, you see kind of a little white faint line here because it's trying to wrap around this in a smooth fashion. So if I want the whole cube to be hard, grab everything, hit harden, this guy, double click, hit harden, that grabs both. And now this is kind of back to our default of 40 degrees. It's not smoothing by 40 degrees, but it looks similar. And just to prove that, we'll go over here. We have this, oops, make sure we have our material selected. Crease by smoothing angle. I can turn this on and off and you're not seeing a difference anymore. So let's leave that off. So the cool thing with this is I can say select any amount of edges, hit harden, and those edges are hard, the unselected edges are soft. Really cool. Other thing you can do is right here, there's select hard edges. Click that, it grabs all the edges that I've made hard so far. Again, these ones I hit the undo button so they're not hard anymore. Or I can hit select soft edges, and that'll grab all the edges but the ones that we just had selected. Again, we'll go into why these are more useful later, but just for now, know that they're there. So in a very quick nutshell, that is edge smoothing. So the next thing that we want to look at is this little just switching to polygon selection mode. So with this one, I can select a series of polygons. Let's just grab a little circle like this, hit harden, deselect that, and you can see that now all the edges, the boundary edges of what I had selected, so again, when I say boundary edges, I mean these guys, the boundary of a selected and a non, so this one would be selected, this is non-selected edges. So again, all of these right here, and then these ones right in the middle. All these become hard. So again, sometimes it's faster to say I want all of these edges to be hard, and you get your result like that. But sometimes it's faster to just say I want those ones hard, harden, and we're selecting by polygon. So again, you can harden by polygon, you can harden by edges selected. It doesn't really matter what you do. The one thing to keep in mind though is if I do polygon, the minimum that I'm going to have would be the boundary edges of what I have selected. So this one, I can only have these guys hard, but this one over here, I can just say, oh, I want just these two. So now I have this scenario where there's a little hard edge here, but this one's soft and this one's soft. So again, just know that there's a difference. It technically performs the same thing kind of behind the scenes, but you can get different results because sometimes you might just want a single edge or a series, a loop of edges hard, and you don't want a loop of polygons hard because again, go ahead and soften all this stuff. There's definitely a difference between this, where there's just one thing, and this, where again, there's going to be two edges. So again, just keep that in mind when you're doing all your smoothing. And lastly, just because you're potentially curious, if I go to vertex mode, I can go ahead and grab a series of vertices. Let's actually just grab one vertice. Actually, let's make sure that all this stuff is soft. So we're just going to grab one individual vertice and we're going to hit harden and see what happens. Click. So if I get at a glancing angle where my light's good, what happens if you select an edge is, if you select a vertice, is every single edge touching that vertice becomes hard. So you get a result like this. So again, there's a difference between making edges hard, vertices hard, or polygons hard. But let's look at a practical example of why we would actually do this smoothing. Because again, it's a little bit goofy just doing it on some primitive shape. So this is the example that I'm going to use. This was a free model that got thrown online like 10 years ago. And it was kind of a model that already had an unwrap that a guy threw out there that he had made that's just for other kind of new users to kind of just practice their painting skills on. So what I'm going to do is just make a second one of these, give it a new material, and then what I'm going to do is just change it to where this one is going to be fully smoothed as opposed to having the kind of desired smoothing that's kind of preemptively made. So if I look at the normal one, let's turn the wireframe on and let's look at her face. She has a relatively low polygon count everywhere. Turn the shading off and let's look at this one and just compare the two. Let's actually get her a little bit closer. We'll go ahead and delete this sword. And I have these in two different mesh items, so I should be able to just bring these really close and I'll be able to select them really easily. So again, this one here, you can see already that it has a few intentionally selected edges that it determined as hard. So it's got some in its eyebrows, some in the lips here to kind of call out that geometry. Handful of other places, a little bit of hard edges under the breasts here just to help with that smoothing so it doesn't look like kind of a melted scenario. And again, like this area, this is gonna, when he's painting the textures on this, he's gonna have this kind of work with it too. So maybe there's a material separation from here to here. Same thing with the lips. It's gonna go from kind of a skin color to a little bit more of a probably a lipstick scenario, or it could just be since the cell structure changes and your lip skin is different than your cheek skin. There's just kind of that little separation there. If we look at the back here, there's a little bit of a difference kind of behind the ears where stuff's a little bit, so it doesn't look as melty. There's just some intentional smoothing that's done on this. So let's turn the wireframe on. And again, realistically what was done here was the desired edges were selected. So we're just selecting the edges on these lips. Go ahead and hit harden. That grabs those. Again, if I turn this off, it looks like we're still missing a few. So let's go ahead and grab those, which would be kind of where the lips would separate. Hit harden. And now we have these two, at least the lip portion of them matching. So again, this is something that the smoothing on this, technically there's no kind of right or wrong way of doing this. I mean, if I was to grab all these edges on her cheeks and say, make all these hard, and I threw this into a game, people are going to be like, why is her face all pixelated and weird looking? So that would kind of be a wrong way. But realistically, you can think of this as just kind of a personal preference, where some people might prefer something like this. So there's a separation in her nose, and see how the lighting is interacting with that. So again, this one doesn't have it, so there's a smooth transition from her nose down to her lip. Some people want this little area right here to be a little bit darker. It has kind of maybe that anime look to it. I don't know if the geometry would work with it. Let's just do this. So again, this really isn't to my taste, but this is another edge you can make hard. So again, as soon as I zoom out, the shading on her nose is a little bit different than the shading over here. You can just see their noses a little bit different. Let's actually grab her eyebrows, soften those, and now just compare the two. Again, difference here, personal preference. Some people might like this better. I'm actually kind of liking it. Some people might like this better. My default that I would like would probably just be these little edges under here being selected. So again, it's just personal preference and what you think kind of looks good. Let's look at some other stuff on her. Let's actually grab these two meshes and get them a little bit farther apart from each other. There we go. So let's look at the bottom of her boots. So this is another one of those. And again, this kind of came up, you could see it on the cylinder. But these edges around here, let's have both of these active. All these edges, the artist intentionally set to be hard. So if I look at the kind of the contrast over here, from this polygon to this polygon, it smooths, where this one to this one, it's a hard edge. So this is just kind of a personal preference thing. So the angle from here to here and the angle from here to here, they're roughly the same, but we want the top of this boot to feel kind of soft. And we can, when we go to texture that, we can just paint that how we want and just make it feel like a smooth transition, like the top of this boot is round and the top of this boot is not, in fact, a 60-degree angle right here. We want this to feel effectively perfectly round so we can paint it and make it look like it's almost a higher polygon count than is actually there. But on the bottom, we have these edges selected. There's kind of various reasons behind this. The one that's usually the case is if I look at, let's just grab the polygons of these and look at them. So if I look at this, this one is getting perfectly flat shading. This one, since the smoothing kind of curls around from this polygon underneath to this polygon up into this one, let's just untriangulate this real quick. So polygon, 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 it's a smooth U shape. What's happening here is I'm getting the shadow right here, and realistically that, in my opinion, kind of looks bad. So this artist obviously agreed with that scenario. So again, this would be the sole of the shoe. So probably when I go to unwrap this, I'm going to have this unwrapped separately. So let's just take a look at his unwrap and see kind of where this is at. So again, the bottom of the shoe, it's separate. So if I grab this edge right here, go back to our modeling tab and look at this, there's already a slice here in the UVs because again, he's painting the bottom of the shoe as a separate piece, and he actually has it go wrap around from here down to here and all one big piece. But regardless, there's an obvious plane change. The flat of the foot is right here, so that's why this is flat. So again, it's not 100% required that I go in and make my smoothing the exact same on this mesh, because again, when this guy was initially creating this, he didn't have somebody else's mesh that he was copy pasting all the smoothing from. He just did what he thought looked good. So realistically, that's kind of smoothing in a nutshell. You kind of want to make change your smoothing around to where your shadows. So under her breast here, there's kind of shadow getting laid. Where this one, there, if I get the angle right, there's a little bit of shadow, but there's kind of a stark plane change or contrast difference between her rib cage right here and right here. Again, smooth transition, hard transition. Same thing with her lips. The difference, change this guy back, between that hard transition of lips and smooth transition of lips. Same thing with the eyebrows, a bunch of other places. So realistically, smoothing is just a what do you think looks better, what kind of works better with this scenario. When we get into normal maps, there's going to be a little bit of kind of rules of thumb of this. These are edges that you should make hard or you should not make hard, and these are reasons why. We're not going to get into that now, but just know that that's also another thing. So aside from cosmetic changes, there are some technical reasons why we would want to have an edge smoothed or not smoothed. So lastly, before I close this out, I just want to make a really brief mention. Normally, whenever we're doing things that are for games or whatever, a lot of times the focus is on the polygon count. So if I select everything in the scene, right here it says there's this many polys. Realistically, we want to focus on triangles. So let's turn this off. And I got rid of some of the triangles, so this number right here doesn't match up with this number right here. But realistically, this GL count, this is our triangle count. So a lot of times when you're working in games, people will be like, oh, you only have 10,000 tries for this character or 20,000 tries for this tree or something like that. So realistically, the thing that kind of actually matters is the vertex count. Really haven't went over that, and I'll keep this really, really brief. But just know that if I have an edge that's smooth, I'm going to have a lower vertex count than an edge or a series of edges that are hard. And the reason behind this is, let's go ahead and make this entire shoe, just her right shoe, hard on the bottom on this side and not this side. Because kind of behind the scenes, what's happening here when it has the separation between this plane and this plane is it's realistically saying, I'm going to cut paste these polygons to make this. So if I just in place, let's go back to where this was. If I grab these polygons, do a cut paste, I get the same result as over here. But if I double click this, I get a separate floating mesh. if I double click this, they're technically connected. So kind of behind the scenes, this vertex is technically 2, and this is kind of what's happening behind the scenes of 1 vertex, 2 vertex. Oops. So the one here and the one here. So this technically has a higher, go back to where it was, this boot technically has a higher vertex count than this boot, just because we cut that off. Same thing here. This vertex count right here, 4 vertices, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I do this, harden, what's going to happen is cut, paste, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, there's these 4 and there's these 4. I just effectively, in this area, doubled my vertex count by making those edges hard. And the other thing, just because we're on the topic, the more you slice up your UVs, so if I do the same thing, let's just look at one boot at a time. Actually look at this one so it's not yellow. We have this UV island. If I grab this, there's 1, 2, 3 vertices for this triangle, but if I grab this, have tear off turned on, move it apart, technically if I texture this and just moved it close, the unwrap is effectively the same. I might not notice it, but now I have 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5. I just increased my vertex count. So technically, the more seams you have in your UVs, the higher your vertex count. The more hard edges you have on your mesh, the higher your vertex count. So there's one more thing that I want to take a look at real quick. Let's go ahead. We'll actually just delete this one out. We really don't need that anymore. Let's just focus on this guy right here. So let's take a look at some of these behind the scenes things that happen with edge smoothing. So I'm going to go over to this Game Tools tab. So the first thing that I want to do is I have this little thing right here, select hard edges. Click all of my edges in this scene that are hard. So she's got some down here. There's some on these little weapons, some on her little hand daggers, some on the sword, like the blade of the sword is sharp, so that obviously would have a hard edge. Again, under the breasts, arms, swords, little wristbands that she has going on, and a little bit behind her ears. Actually, there's a little one on her chin as well. We did kind of miss that one. But at any time, I can just hit this select hard edges, and it somehow remembers these. So let's answer, how does it remember those? So technically what it's doing when I hit hardness, it's kind of doing 2 things. The first thing that it's doing is it's assigning these to be hard edges. The second thing that it's doing is actually saving all of these edges to a little kind of nest that it can reference back to. So let's figure out how to use these. And what they're actually called, instead of a nest, is a selection set. So let's say that this little loop of polygons around her leg is a little chunk of polygon edges or vertices, it can be any of these, that I want to save because I'm always coming back and selecting these, and I don't want to manually spin around her leg and select all these all the time. And if you have something that's even more complicated, like all of these edges, for example, I don't want to have to remember all this stuff. So to save this in a selection set, what you do is have it selected in the mode you want. So I want to remember the polygons, not the edges or the vertices. I'm going to hit right click. I'm going to hit add to selection set. And now I'm effectively creating a selection set. So I'm going to name these leg polygon loop. So this is a loop of polygons around the leg. The mode is set to add. We'll hit OK. Now we deselect, and let's say that we're up working on the shoulder, doing whatever, and oh, I need to edit that, or for whatever reason, select that number of polygons. So to select these, right click, recall selection set. This little drop down, I only have the one that I created in here. Select that. The mode is select, because again, there's some other things you can replace, deselect, whatever. We want to select our selection set, hit OK, and there we go, it remembered our stuff. So effectively this is behind the scenes kind of doing that same thing. So the next thing that we want to look at is open up this little guy called Other Maps. And we have this little thing right here that's created as soon as the first time we hit harden on a mesh is this little thing called hard edges. So if I right click and delete that, hit OK. Now all those edges that I had, they're gone. So I can't really recall those in any way. It's deleted. So let's undo that. So this little guy right here, its mode is set to hard edges. It's going to hold what edges are hard, and then the opposite of that is going to be what edges are soft. So select soft edges, just kind of grabs the opposite of that. But the main thing I want you to pull from this is, since this is a moto scene, this little thing that says hard edges, it can be there and it can do its thing. But this little guy right here, even though it has all the power of the edge control, it can only be here if this is a moto scene. So let's do File, Save As. This is just Ninja Girl. We'll call it Ninja Girl 02. And we're going to save her as a different file type. So again, common type that you guys use, FBX. Hit Save, hit OK. Now we're going to close this scene and open it back up. So our Ninja Girl 01 FBX, if we look at it, it right now at least, it looks the same. But the thing you'll notice over here is in this other maps, let's just go ahead and open our other file up. Our Ninja Girl. We don't really need that diffuse. So this one, ignore this guy, don't really need him. This hard edge is in here. But when we go to the FBX, again, this LXO right here, FBX, go to the FBX. Now this changed to FBX Normals. So this hard edges. So I can go in here and say all these edges on her chest, whatever, set to hard. I have that control. If I go to this one, I go to FBX Normals. Those are just kind of there. I'll try to do that same thing. Hit harden. Uh-oh. They're not hard. And now we have FBX Normals and hard edges. So let's undo that real quick. So what this is doing is an FBX can understand the difference between a smooth edge and a hard edge, but it's not a Moto file, so it can't do all the things that Moto can do. So when we go here, what it's effectively doing is, this is the LXO, it's taking this, right click, like let's pretend this is Photoshop, right click, flatten image. I know that's not an option, we're just pretending here, but it flattens all this data into this little guy called FBX Normals. So let's say I in fact didn't want to do the thing to her nose. I can't just hit soften and it'll soften her nose up. I can click this all day long and nothing is going to happen. So what needs to happen now is I can right click, hit delete, yes, but now all my smoothing is gone. So I have to go back to the material, reset the smoothing so it's material property reference, turn this off, now everything's smooth. Now I need to go in and select all these edges all over again and make them all hard, and it's going to take forever, and I'm going to be very sad that I have to do the work over again. So this is kind of a downfall of this process. Whenever you save out of FBX, everything gets flattened. So just keep that in mind. But the other thing that you can potentially do is we have our Ninja Girl LXO. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little workaround. I'm going to do select hard edges, right click, add to selection set. So my hard edges, these are the ones that I made. So now both of these are in here. Now let's save this out as a FBX. We have Ninja Girl 01. We'll make Ninja Girl 02. Hit save. Now I'm just going to close this so it forgets all the history. Open this back up. So now this FBX has FBX Normals instead of the other smoothing that was in there that just said hard edges. Now there's my hard edges, and this is type edge pick. So what I can do now is I can right click, delete my FBX Normals. Everything's terrible. I go to the material. I set my edge smoothing angle off, turn that off. Now everything is 100% smooth. Don't want that yet. But now I can go to edges. Again, I'm trying to recall an edge set, so I don't want polygons, I want edges. Right click, recall selection set, my hard edges, hit OK. Now I just hit hard edges. And now this, I can leave that in there, that edge pick, or I can delete it out. It's just remembering those. But now this file, I could resave this out as a moto scene or something like that. So just know there's almost always a way to get your stuff back. The only time you couldn't would be is if you were working on this file, you only saved out an FBX file and you didn't create your My Hard Edges edge pick, or by doing that, you just right click, add to selection set, create that new selection set. If you don't do that, you'll effectively lose all the work that you just did of selecting all those edges. So again, just know that that process is a thing and it should help you out. So overall, that's really all there is to edge smoothing at this time. Again, when we talk about baking out normal maps and everything that those entail, we're going to hit back on these edge smoothing, but just know that you assign a material, go to that material properties, top tab, turn off crease by smoothing angle. We don't want, move that up, this little smoothing angle affecting our edges. We want to manually pick all these. We manually pick them by going over here on this little joystick tab. We play with these buttons right here. If you go from tab to tab though, there's this little pop-out vertex tool, so click on that, click and drag. Now I have all these tools, which are all these tools, and I can go to my modeling tab and just have this up, have it on a separate window, whatever. Let's close that out. But I modify those over here. If I want, I can do select hard edges to grab them, right click, add to selection set, make a thing called My Hard Edges, hit OK, then save out an FBX and turn that in. So again, this isn't a follow-along video. You don't have to, and I won't even give you this mesh. It's just kind of for you to review. But whenever you save out a file from now on, just make sure that you do select My Edges, right click, add to selection set, make a little group called My Hard Edges, save that out, and then do a file save. So you're effectively keeping your working file to be a Moto file, but then the file you give me will be file, save as, FBX, and then deliver me the FBX.